When I fall in love, I get dizzy. I fall out there just to...
This is Historical Hotties, a podcast where we go through different categories of historical figure and try and figure out which one is the biggest babe.
Still,
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Historical Hotties. I am your host, Whitney Nelson, and this is my co-host,
Lindsey Nelson.
And here at Historical Hotties, we pick a category of historical figure, and then we break it down and rank those historical figures in 4 categories. Those categories are physical attractiveness, mental attractiveness, social impact, and je ne sais quoi. And then we figure out between the two of us which one has the biggest babe. Lindsay, would you like to start us off? Today's category is models.
Thank you, Whitney. So, my hottie has been alternately known as the American Venus, Miss Manhattan, the Panama Pacific Girl, and America's first supermodel. She is Audrey Munson, and she was the it girl of the Gilded Age. You see her every day, Whitney. You've probably seen her naked like dozens of times because she was the artist model used for so much of the statuary that decorates Manhattan. She posed for artists in other places, but she was based in Manhattan because she was born in upstate New York in June of 1891, and her parents got divorced when she was 7, which was pretty unusual still for the age. So her and her mother moved to New York so that her mother could work in theater and as a chorus girl and stuff like that. She was taking music lessons and was window shopping waiting for her mother after her music lessons when a photographer kind of like found her and scouted her on the street. Supposedly. It was Felix Benedict Herzog who asked her to pose for him in his studio, and he liked her so much that he introduced her to his friend, the sculptor Isidore Conti, and he liked her a lot, but he said that if she was going to pose for him, she had to do it in the all together, because he was doing statuary, and she was fine with that. So he sculpted, the first ever statue of her was the 3 Graces for the Grand Ballroom at the Hotel Astor in Times Square, and that was the first sculpture made of her. But he liked her so much that he introduced her to a bunch of his painter and sculptor friends, and she ended up being personifications and goddesses all over New York. Sort of the height of her fame and popularity and notoriety came in 1915 with the World's Fair, because there was this Panama Pacific International Exposition, and she was used by so many of the artists that she ended up being 2/3 of all of the statuary in the Panama International Expedition. She's in the Court of the Four Seasons, is all 4 seasons. She's the goddess of technology. She's like creativity and inspiration. She is all over that place. Part of what made her so successful and popular at the time is that New York was currently a big proprietor of the Beaux-Arts style, which was this Grecian imposing temple-style buildings with all of this decorative, allegorical statuary and decorations. So she was in very high demand. Her career came to kind of an early and tragic end because of sort of 2 things. One is that she tried to go out to Hollywood and break into the burgeoning film industry, but because she was so notorious for being naked, they would only really cast her as a nude art model in things, but she does hold the distinction of being the first female lead to ever appear fully nude on screen. And then at the same time, she got caught up in a scandal where the landlord of her apartment building, where she and her mother were living, fell so desperately in love with her that he poisoned his wife so that they could be together. This was completely one-sided. She'd never done more than said hi to him in the hall or anything, but the ensuing scandal and newspaper coverage, and she was made to testify in court and everything, between those 2 things kind of brought her career to an end. She was so well known that she was called the first American supermodel, and it was said that every boy in Manhattan had a crush on her at the peak of her career. So that is my hottie.
Nice, very nice. All right, so my hottie is generally known as the world's first black supermodel. Naomi Ruth Sims rose to stardom kind of in the late 60s, early 70s. She was born in 1948, and she had a pretty unlikely rise to the top. She came from a troubled home, spent time in foster care when her parents took ill, She was ostracized by her peers for her height. She was 5'10" by the time she was 13 years old. She moved to New York City and received a scholarship to the Fashion Institute of Technology. And while she was studying at the Fashion Institute of Technology, she attempted to break into the modeling biz. Of course, racism made it nearly impossible. There were so few people in modeling anywhere that were African American at all. And she really had a fashion focus in her life everywhere. That's why she was going to the Fashion Institute of Technology for school. Agencies often criticized her for having skin that was too dark, even when they had black models on their roster. She had very, very, very dark skin. And it was not like a light sort of mixed color of skin. She was very, very black. And so she had so many agencies not taking her and criticizing her look and all of that. She ended up deciding to go straight to the fashion photographers instead. And that actually worked out for her rather than going through agencies. Gosta Peterson, a New York Times photographer, put her in the 1967 August fashion supplement. So it was like a little fashion magazine that went into the New York Times in 67. She used the copies of that Times issue as her calling card, but agencies still were not interested at the beginning. So Naomi Sims, showing a little bit of the enterprise that later kind of defines her career. She had a lot of chutzpah. She told Wilhelmina Cooper, who was a former model starting her own agency, that she would send out copies of the magazine, the New York Times fashion magazine, to agencies, to advertising agencies and fashion photographers on her own and staple the Wilhelmina Cooper's number to the back of them. And then if she got a job, Wilhelmina Cooper could have a commission if anyone called back. So the agency did no work for her. She did all the work for herself, but putting an agent's name on it made it look more legitimate, and then the agency would get money if anyone gave her a job.
And they love that.
So that actually worked, and within a year, Naomi Sims was earning about $1,000 a week and been hired for a national television campaign for AT&T, which showed her along with two other models, one who was white and one who was Asian, wearing fashions by Bill Blass, and that really is sort of what launched her career. She said, "It helped me more than anything else because it showed my face." Then she ended up making history by appearing on the cover of Ladies' Home Journal, which was the first time a black model was featured so prominently in any kind of mainstream women's publication. And she got a cover piece, which was huge. She also, after the AT&T ad aired, she said people wanted to find out more about me, and that led to wanting to use me. That also got her a Life cover. And that was also hugely barrier breaking. She used this popularity to her advantage, where she ended up authoring several books on beauty, health, and fashion, which built her a reputation as an expert on black women's health and beauty. She ended up dying in 2009 of breast cancer, but before that she founded the Naomi Sims Collection, which was a multi-million-dollar business that specialized in beauty and health products for black women. And that's my pick.
Oh, interesting. Very, very strong picks here. Both of them.
Very strong picks here, both of them.
Yeah. So let's get into our categories, break this down, and see if we can find who is the hottest historical model. And let's talk about their mental attractiveness. So one of the things that I find really intriguing and interesting and attractive about Audrey is when you look at the body of work that she was involved in, the face is almost always recognizable, but the body can look radically different. You know, in some she's very like lithe and willowy, and in some she's very curvy and voluptuous. And part of that was because she was so good at, she went out of her way to study artists before she worked with them, their work and what they liked, so she would get a good vibe for what they did and what they found interesting in a pose and that kind of stuff. So she was great about doing her homework. She was so empathetic and creative in her posing. People talked about how she could embody these concepts, that they would tell her, like, we need you to represent, you know, the goddess of innovation, or this is goddess of spring, and her whole demeanor would change, and she could hold a pose for hours, and she was great at coming up with these really dynamic and interesting poses. And so I think that really speaks a lot to sort of her intellectually interesting side, and the way that she put in the work beforehand to learn about the artist, and she could interpret the different artists so well that she can come across so differently in so many different pieces of art. So I think she's definitely a solid 4 in mental attractiveness.
Okay, yeah, I could agree with that. Okay, so Naomi Sims in interviews often said that she held the modeling industry in low regard because of the way that male executives treated her, and more generally, she said, because people have the idea that models are stupid. So she actually only lasted about 5 years before she gave up modeling. She became internationally recognized as one of, if not the black supermodel, attaining the level of supermodel in just those 5 years. But she ended up getting frustrated with the industry and started a wig making business with styles specifically designed for black women because she realized that most wigs and products out there were not for black women. That eventually expanded into the aforesaid multi-million-dollar beauty empire. She wrote at least 5 books on modeling, beauty, and lifestyle. They were stuffed with like no-nonsense advice directed towards black women, giving guidance on how to speak, no swear words was one of the tips. How to write a resume on heavy bond paper was one of the tips. And how to shake hands, never while seated, was one of the tips. This gave her a reputation for not just being an attractive person, but being a smart person and a capable person. Running your own business and starting it from the ground up obviously says a lot about your mental capacity, but also putting things, makeup and hair and all of that sort of stuff, as along with books specifically directed to help black women succeed, is a really big deal. So the other little thing is she very much stayed away from anything that she construed as racist. She was definitely looking to build black women up and not
reinforce stereotypes.
Play into stereotypes, yeah. So she was actually offered the title role of Cleopatra Jones in 1972, but she turned it down because she said she was offended by the racist portrayal of black people. So she was actually offered, like, the move into Hollywood, and she didn't want to do it because she didn't like how that portrayed black women. Yeah, so I definitely think that she's a 5. Like, that shows an incredible amount of determination to get into modeling, an incredible amount of self-awareness and self-possession to leave modeling if it frustrates you because everyone assumes that you're stupid when in fact you're really smart, to then start from the ground up a business whose whole business model is helping to build up black women in a professional way. I just think kind of on all of the ways of mental attractiveness, she kind of hits a little bit of every category. So I'm going to vote a 5.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's very impressive to enter into a field that is telling you all the time that it doesn't want you to have to fight against all of these...
That you're not attractive enough because of how dark you are.
To fight against all these prejudices and stereotypes that you know are stupid, but understand that they're still there and try and figure out ways to combat them instead of giving up or succumbing to them. I think that is definitely very attractive, and how practical she was about stuff and her integrity, and I definitely think that's a solid 4 in mental attractiveness.
Okay. Physical attractiveness?
Well, I mean, we know that these are both going to be high scorers in this category based on the fact that they were...
Yeah, that's kind of a given when you choose models.
They were paid to be pretty, so...
When your whole historical legacy is that you were an attractive person.
Yeah. So, but I do think there is something very compelling about Audrey Munson. She had, part of the reason that so many sculptors and stuff were attracted to her was that she has a very classical art style face, it's very symmetrical, it's very kind of soft and round and feminine. But I think her kind of ability to be a storyteller with her looks is what I always find really, really beautiful and compelling about her. There's this one picture that I've seen of her a lot where she's sort of curled in a chair, looking at her hands holding a string of pearls, and you can't even see her full face on, but there's just something so intriguing about the image that you want to, you're really drawn into it. There's always something very wistful about her, I think. So I obviously think she's gorgeous, and like you said, professional models and first supermodels in both these categories. So I definitely think Audrey's a 5 as far as looks.
I definitely agree. She's got just a beautiful, softness and femininity to her, and there's definitely something going on in her eyes, even though, her body was clearly what she was known for, the expressiveness of it. That's why she ended up doing so much statuary work, but there's a lot of depth in her face as well. I definitely think she's very attractive. I think that I have to grade on a little bit of a curve because I think they're not nearly comparable at all, Naomi Sims and Audrey. I'm going to say 4.5 for Audrey, but I don't think that she's as attractive as Naomi Sims, so I think I'm going to do 4.5 for her and 5 for Naomi Sims. And I'll talk about Naomi Sims in a minute, but just so you know, that's kind of where my head is at.
Okay, I can see that.
So Naomi Sims was 6 feet tall. Obviously, this is one of the things that got her into trouble with a career, but is, in my opinion, a very big asset, is her dark skin is just gorgeous. She has very African features, which, while that doesn't show up in stories about her, is, I think, just as much of a reason that she didn't get jobs as her dark skin is it's not westernized at all in her features. She has very solidly African features. She has a huge forehead and a very strong jaw, and obviously a long, gorgeous neck. She has a very regal look about her, and obviously at 10 feet tall, there's a certain amount of, like, carriage to be a model and to be that tall that you need to have, which she definitely does. She feels very regal when you look at most of the pictures of her. It said, this is an actual quote, that her leggy strides were described as enough to sizzle the sidewalks on a cold day.
Her leggy strides.
Yes. Her leggy strides.
I have never heard that description used before.
There's her husband, she had married an art dealer named Michael Finlay, and Finlay talked about the first meeting with her at a party where Timothy Leary was currently wooing her, and he said, she dissuaded him in a charming but definitive way with such aplomb that I was captivated. And I think that sort of charming but aloof really sort of fits into how she looks in her photographs. She's just really captivating. And she definitely has this, like, regal, unattainable beauty. At the same time that there's something still sort of approachable and soft in her expressions and the way that she carries herself. And she was obviously a very fashionable person because fashion was in her mind from day one. So I'm going to vote a 5 for her.
I think she's super gorgeous, really striking. She has amazing cheekbones, and you know how I feel about a cheekbone, like...
Yeah.
But there's also, I think one of the things that I find most sort of striking and compelling about her, I think you're right about her chin, like her jaw, and there's something about the lines between, like, her chin and her neck, the relationship of, like, her jaw to her neck that's just really beautiful. And I do think that, like, her skin tone is so gorgeous and her bearing is so stunning. So I would definitely give her a 5 in physical attractiveness.
Okay, so social impact. Currently, there are 2 images of Naomi Sims, one from the 1967 Times Fashion magazine cover, and the other from a 1969 issue of Life, that are currently in the Metropolitan Museum of Art exhibition Model as a Muse. The curators of the exhibit, Harold Koda and Cole Johannen, I think I'm saying those right, they both said that the beautifully contoured symmetry of Sims' face and the lithe suppleness of her body presented on the once exclusionary pages of high fashion journals were evidence of the wider societal movement of Black pride and the full expression of Black is beautiful. And that's something that you will see if you start Googling and looking into Naomi Sims. The Black is beautiful comes up all of the time. Coming into popularity in the 60s and 70s when so much was happening with race and becoming a supermodel and showing up on the pages of Ladies' Home Journal and Life that are predominantly all white people on the covers and making it... You know, obviously, there's only so much that a model can do to change the world and impact social justice, but everything that she could do, she did do. And so I definitely think that with social impact, there is a huge amount of, you know, we talk so much about what we see on the pages of fashion magazines influencing culture, and to fight so hard in such an intelligent way for Black women to be powerful and to be beautiful and to be normal and to be successful in business as she was, like, I personally think social impact there is huge. So she got into the whole business after modeling because as a model, she had to do her own hair and makeup because none of the hair and makeup artists knew what to do with Black skin and Black hair. So she noticed that all of the weaves and the wigs were designed for Caucasian hair and they didn't really work with African hair, and so she started experimenting with her own designs. She actually baked synthetic hairs in her home oven to try to create the right texture. So she's like literally at home doing chemistry and mixing cosmetics and baking synthetic hairs to get the right texture to look like straightened black hair, really put a lot of time and thought into it. And within 5 years, her designs for hair had the annual sales of $5 million. And then she got into the makeup business, and then she wrote 5 books. So I definitely think social impact wise, as far as a model can have an impact, I think she's top of the charts. I will also say that because, like you said, I can walk down the streets of New York and see Audrey everywhere, I'm just going to tell you right now that I'm rating both of them a 5 in social impact. I do think that there's sort of a curve because we've talked about people who have done more to change the world, but I also think there's really something to be said for changing the world when it comes to beauty and fashion and opening people's eyes up to things. But like for her, it to be more than 100 years since she was popular and I still see her beauty walking down the streets of New York, like that is definitely social impact. So just so you know, I'm gonna go right out and rate them both a 5.
Okay, well, you've kind of made my case for me a little bit on mine, because like I have a quote that talks about long after she and everyone else of this generation shall have become dust. Audrey Munson, who posed for 3/5 of all statuary of the Panama Pacific Exposition, will live in the bronze and canvas of the art centers of the world. And that's a quote from the New Oxford Items. And I'm definitely going to give Naomi a 5 because I think representation is so important. There's so much of proved about how we see ourselves represented in the world, and who we see represented in the world affects the way that we think about the world. And so to push for diversity and beauty and that Black women should have the same access to hair and makeup abilities, and they shouldn't be disadvantaged every time they go to work. It's hard enough as minorities to get jobs in the fashion industry that then nobody's prepared for them once they get there, and refusing to do representations in, you know, fashion and film that she didn't think portrayed the full complexity of Black women is great. And so I will definitely give her a 5. I think partially because Audrey, in a way, even though she's so omnipresent in places like New York, has slipped a little bit into obscurity and not a lot of people know who she is and stuff. I think she's probably more of a 4, though I'm arguing down my own person.
Yeah, I was going to say, I gave her a 5. What are you trying to make me take back my score?
No, I'm keep your 5. Keep your 5. I'm just saying I'm not trying to get you to change your score. I'm just saying in these, you know, to try and be objective, I think Naomi's social impact is probably a little bit bigger, but I do think that
part of it is the A, there's a fight, and B, it's a fight where we are still fighting.
Yes.
And I think that is what makes Naomi Sims feel much bigger in social impact, because while obviously a huge impact of decades of art and statues is a big deal, there's not necessarily a fight that she was fighting, and it's certainly not one that we're still fighting. I definitely think that she didn't have struggle. Obviously, she tried to get into movies and everyone was like, no, you're the naked lady, you can't be in movies. I think that there's definitely an element of, you know, bias there that she definitely had to work through. But I think that, yeah, just in the terms of social justice, there's a big difference there.
All right, so je ne sais quoi.
Je ne sais quoi, I mean, I pretty much given all of my points for je ne sais quoi. Naomi Sims was like great at being tough and no nonsense without being pushy. She didn't force anyone to do anything her way. She didn't make a big scene about it. She just stood there quietly pushing for accurate Black representation in fashion, and that later in cinema when she was offered that job, and in cosmetics. And, you know, I think that the second you start reading about Naomi Sims, all of her personality seems to be right there on the surface. I think that she has a lot of gumption and charisma and a good head attached to her shoulders, and she definitely has a lot going for her. I don't think in like intangible something, I don't know that she's as rich in it as Audrey is.
Yeah, I mean, I think Audrey's pretty rich in intangible somethings. There's something very bemusing and charming about her.
Yeah, and a little bit magical looking. Like, yeah. She looks like fairies are like sitting on her shoulder.
And she was, unfortunately, between the scandal that happened and sort of after World War II, the Beaux-Arts style falling out of popularity, and she was also in her 30s by then and got kind of pushed out of modeling. Her and her mother went back to the small town in upstate New York they were originally from, but she refused to stop being herself to fit into this small town. She still had her fabulous international wardrobe and would dress to the nines to just like go into town. She would also rollerblade around town, or roller skate. Rollerblades weren't a thing yet, but she would roller skate around town because that had been part of her exercise regime. So there was this fabulously dressed woman skating around this small town and everybody thought she was crazy. And then there's this story I really love about, she ended up in a nursing home. She died, it was only 1996. She lived to be 104. In her last few years at the nursing home.
That's only 13 years before mine died.
I know. She had a good run at it, but she was in this nursing home and there was this bar across the street and she would get all dressed up and dash across the 4-lane highway in like gowns and go to this bar and drink with people and tell them all of these stories about like old New York and stuff, and the nursing staff could not stop her, could not like keep her in from the, and that was like
I love it.
in the last few years of her life. So I think that's pretty strong.
Hashtag old lady goals.
I know. So old lady goals. So I think that's like a 5 in je ne sais quoi. I don't think it gets much better than that.
Yeah, okay, so what do you vote? Because I voted 4 for Naomi and 5 for Audrey in Je ne sais quoi. You're voting 5 for Audrey. What are you voting for Naomi?
4 was my rating for Naomi, too.
All right.
I think she's a very compelling person, but doesn't have quite that edge of intangibility that really pushes you in Je ne sais quoi.
All right, so here's where we debate consistently about whether half
Stars are a thing.
marks are allowed or not. And we kind of need to decide right here and now whether half marks are allowed. Because we currently have a score of 36.5 to 37. And if I'm forced to round, because my 4.5 of physical attractiveness for Audrey, if I'm forced to commit to one, I'm choosing a 5 and then they're a tie.
It's tough. We have not ever come down. I mean, we've done a lot without any, and then there's been a few where they've been thrown in, and we've talked about it. I don't know. Do we want to throw it out to our listeners about whether they think half stars count or
I think
not?
that's a good idea. So as it stands right now, if half points count, Naomi Sims is the winner by 0.5.
If half stars are just failure to commit to a rating...
then we have a tie between the two hotties. So I think that's a great idea. Listeners, we will leave it up to you.
Tweet at us at Historically Hot. We have an Instagram page. You can leave comments there. Let us know whether
That's also Historically Hot, and we have a Facebook page as well. So anywhere on social media that you use it, you can find us. And let us know what you think, because the determination of the winner is up to you guys.
And whether you think half stars are nuanced or a cop-out.
I will say there's not a lot of wiggle room in a 1 to 5 scale. I vote for half stars, but I also don't know that I vote for my hottie winning because of a half star. I don't know that that's good either. So we'll leave it up to everybody else.
So cliffhanger. We don't know who won.
Let us know who won. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's everything. So thanks, guys, for listening. Make sure to subscribe to us on iTunes. And if you haven't yet, we'd super appreciate it if you could rate us 5 stars and leave a comment in the iTunes store. That helps us really get out there and get to new ears and help find our audience. So we appreciate it. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time to talk about some historical hotties.
Bye.
Bye.
Though I acted